how we respond and recover from ransomware. And I'm going to ask each of them to quickly introduce themselves, including their organization, role, and their involvement with ransomware. So I'll start with Pamela, please.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm Pamela Gupta. I have been a cybersecurity expert, I should say, for the last 25 years, have been a former CISO in a Fortune 500 company. And after 15 years of doing that, started my own company, OutSecure. I am on the CPAC Council, Leadership Council. I've been very involved in some of the activities David mentioned, such as the CPAC guidance on cybersecurity, as well as leading a COVID-19 task force for NIST GCTC CPAC. That is actually, there is a video on that in the CPAC booth. So please stop by and visit us there. I'm going to talk about ransomware.
Hold on, Pam.
Yes.
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm going to finish doing the introductions first, and then I'll have you give us an introduction. So Davis, if you would, please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, David. Although I'll keep it brief because I want to definitely hear what Pamela has to say. I spent around a decade in the national security policy community on Capitol Hill, where I drafted some of the first comprehensive cybersecurity legislation. And as no good deed goes unpunished, I then went to Homeland Security in the Obama administration to serve as a policy advisor there, where I was actually a customer of a lot of SRI's and David's work, which they were an excellent partner. After that, I transitioned to the White House to lead federal incident response, where I oversees breaches, which was a lot more fun than it sounds, actually. And it came out here back to California, and now we've started a cyber insurance company where our sort of core idea is to combine security and insurance together to provide comprehensive risk management. We can talk a little bit more about that aside as well too, but in more punishment, I've spent the last 4 years as a security professional embedded in the insurance industry and watched ransomware start to run rampant, especially through municipalities. So I'm really excited to be here and share some thoughts with you today.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. All right. And finally, Stephen, if you could please introduce yourself. Your colleague, Victor Fang, unfortunately was not able to make it. And so you graciously agreed to step in for Victor. And so please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I spent about half a decade working in advancing healthcare policy for the underprivileged, and recently joined Enchain.ai. I spent the past 2 years sort of advancing the cryptocurrency side of the ransomware equation. So I'm standing in for our CEO, Dr. Victor Fang, and I'll be discussing some of the ways in which we use some of our machine learning technology to track down the actual criminals who create the ransomware, kind of addressing the problem from the other side.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Pamela, I'm going to start with you. And if you could please let everybody know, how exactly does ransomware affect cities?
So cities are impacted in a big way, as we know, right? The consequences are immense. And Atlanta is a prime example of that. Not to pick on any particular victim here, but because it is an economic hub, it is plays a very large role in the industry and in the for domestically for us. Any city that gets affected will have consequences that go far beyond what one may imagine at the outset. So some of the things that we can expect are the obvious, right? Denial or degradation of smart city services, or connected services, connected city services such as public Wi-Fi, hospitals, first alert, first responders, etc. And there's also a monetary loss, like I mentioned, from the economic loss, if it's a hub, as in the case of Atlanta. Last but not least is the degradation of trust in government and smart city services, because there are a lot of different, when you have a contingency that you go to, and you are firstly not going to be able to provide the kind of services that are expected and required. So there's going to be some degradation. and of the service itself, as well as the capability of your the city or the state to be resilient to this. So, they have to set a good example for the rest of them. Now, referring this, this is some of the things that we have covered in the NIST GCTC 2020 CPAC ransomware resource kit that Dave and Peter Wong had authored, and I had been part of the review process for that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pamela. Stephen, I want to jump over to you. Tell us what can be done to improve our ransomware response capabilities in industry, and how has that evolved over time?
So as far as tracking down the actual funds themselves, we've really come a long way. So previously, when Bitcoin first became the preferred medium for ransomware, it was pretty much a hopeless task. You're pretty much not getting those funds back. You have no idea really how you're going to track them down. And at the time, cryptocurrency exchanges were not collecting KYC information. So even in the event that you could track the transactions to an exchange-affiliated address, there was really no way you could identify a real-life person associated with it. At this point, now that cryptocurrency exchanges have really moved towards legitimization, and now that we've become much more effective in identifying not only a wallet associated with a cryptocurrency exchange, but getting law enforcement involved to the extent that they're then compelled to provide the information, we can much more reliably connect a ransomware programmer to their actual cryptocurrency wallet. So we've been very successful not only in ransomware remediation, but also in retrieving funds associated with all other manners of malware.
Well, that's great. That's great. Okay, Davis, over to you. Without getting into too much of the question of whether or not a victim should pay or not, there's a lot of discussion around that in the community. Are there any strategies to combat ransomware holistically?
Yeah, thanks very much, David. So, in the insurance industry, we unfortunately have been able to see lots of examples of response done well and done poorly, which, Pamela mentioned Atlanta, which unfortunately suffered a huge amount of pain for a small amount of loss. But there are sort of generally three things that sort of need to happen. The first one is the resilience of the clients. So when we look at our clients, planning ahead of time, ensuring proper cyber hygiene, and then investing in security tools, as some other entities that fared better in their ransomware attacks have done. But the second one is actually the insurance industry itself. As an insurance and security company, we very much understand that a lot of this problem is economic, and certainly don't want to be driving it even through potentially having to pay a ransom on behalf of a victim. So there's actually a lot that the insurance industry can be doing to encourage proper hygiene among its clients and taking into account factors that might lead to ransomware even, and educating their clients on that. And the last piece is coordination. So, in the news most recently, there's been some reporting about actions potentially taken by US Cyber Command and Microsoft against the TrickBot botnet, which have been responsible for delivering a lot of Rook ransomware. I think efforts like this, should probably be more coordinated as a public-private type operation. And I think there's certainly more that, we've seen that the insurance industry can do to cooperate as well. But the only way that we're going to beat the adversary's ability to cooperate and share tools is by doing the same thing ourselves. And I think this is an area where, Stephen mentioned working with law enforcement, even exploring the crypto side, potentially going after these guys are going to have to be some new strategies in the future. Okay,
fantastic. Pamela, I want to shift back to you. We've been focused primarily on city services, but the ransomware also affects the supply chain. Can you talk a little bit more about how that?
Yes. So what we are seeing out there is that, for example, MSP, managed service providers, are getting attacked because as COVID started and companies started adopting and transitioning to the cloud or doing a digital transformation, there is a explosion of the risk service, and part of that is laying open the eternal security question as to how is your third party introducing risk into your organization. So if you don't have access to the control and uncontrol over your third parties in the supply chain, firstly, we saw the resilience factor come into play with COVID. But apart from that, how do you secure the supply chain? One of the things that, CISA just mentioned is just published a guide for ransomware protection. And one of the facts they mentioned, and I had put that into the slide, was that take into consideration the risk management and hygiene of your third parties, right? It is, if it was already a challenge, and now it's a much, much more exploded challenge for our companies.
Okay, got it. Davis, I want to circle back with you. Cyber insurance. No, I'm sorry. I skipped ahead one. Stephen, I want to come back to you. What are the problems with our current modus operandi for responding to ransomware?
So we have a couple of issues with how we are handling ransomware right now. Obviously, there is sort of an economy behind ransomware, which Davis already mentioned. And we have to understand, of course, the human element, which is that when someone is subject to ransomware, they want to mitigate the situation as quickly as possible. And I'm sure we all understand the sentiment behind that. At the same time, we really want to attack the economy there, right? Not only do we want to reduce the incentive to create ransomware, we want to create actual ramifications. And we are doing that by actually tracking down the individuals who are creating it. As time goes on, I think we're becoming more and more effective then at doing things from both ends, right? And as time goes on, I think we want to phase out sort of the insurance side of things and become much more effective at combating things from a criminal enforcement side of things.
Okay. Well,
yeah, and I would just weigh in and say I completely agree. Having seen a lot of insurance claims go through on ransomware, I think the insurance industry is well aware that having to pay ransoms is the worst option, right? But I don't think, to my point, we've done enough on looking at the prevention side. I mean, the insurance industry hasn't done enough around encouraging prevention or working with firms like Stephen on-chain to be able to actually, try to track down these bad guys and report back to law enforcement so that they don't have further clients up for that. All right, I totally agree, Stephen.
Davis, cyber insurance has been very active in the area of ransomware, as you mentioned. Can you speak a little bit to that and give us some examples of where it's gone well and maybe where it's gone poorly?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got kind of brought up in our slides sort of a tale of two cities to highlight two claims examples. Historically, not ones that we handled, but ones from the industry. You already touched on Atlanta, where for a $50,000 ransom, where it's unclear if Atlanta paid or not, but it appears that they did not, they suffered at least a $2.7 million remediation bill, and reported estimates are as high as $17 million in the effects that it had, hitting their utility billing system, hitting their court systems. I believe they had to actually have their court systems operate off paper for a while after the restoration. But when you look ahead to what happened to Hartford back in September of 2020, they had previously invested a $500,000 in upgrading their security. It's unclear exactly what they did, but for around that bill, it suggests potentially an MSSP. It suggests maybe advanced endpoint deployment, email security gateway, maybe training. And along with this, they were actually able, once they were hit, to recover within the day and coming forward. And I think that, it really highlights how much preparation really counts from a return on investment standpoint. And when we see clients that come in for insurance, we give everybody an hour-long tabletop exercise on how to respond specifically to ransomware or email fraud, which we also see a lot of too. So I think when you actually look at this problem, right, it actually is getting bigger and bigger for municipalities. You mentioned Atlanta with SamSam, with allegedly the Iranians, or at least two Iranian individuals were behind the SamSam attacks. And then most recently, when Pamela was talking about third-party vendors, we've seen Tyler Technologies issue, where Tyler Technologies was a supplier to a lot of state and municipality systems, including election systems as well too. And it becomes not just a concern for potentially degrading and being a high cost to the city, but potentially impacting having national implications about these attacks. And so really municipalities are becoming the front line of this. And I think a lot of these core strategies, and I know a lot of people on this call looking at their titles, Director IT, Director of Security, are really the first responders in a lot of this new wave of cybercrime.
All right. Any other reactions from the panelists?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, that we're talking about ransomware has always been a big issue, right? Has had impact. Talked about Atlanta, which was a year ago, but now we are seeing them become threat to life crimes, right? This is not even just impacting your data or efficiency. We are seeing a death that occurred from somebody having to be rerouted to a different clinic. And one of the things that I had created a ransomware protection plan last year that I think we really need to take a look at this from a holistic perspective. It is a problem, but it is avoidable. We have to be strategic about it if we want to go and address it. So I'll give you one non-technical example, okay, which is the Adecco prison, which is the highest security prison in the U.S., and it is for the highest form of crime, such as terrorists, etc. That's where they put them. These prisons are facing outside. Each one, there is solitary confinement, and each cell does have a window, but it's facing outside at an angle, so they can only see the sky. And the point is, there is so much isolation that if somebody does break into, or somebody, one cell gets compromised, they really cannot do anything to the rest of the establishment. My point being, we have to be proactive. We have a lot of security paradigms that can be leveraged, and this is avoidable. The latest issue that we have seen, and the one on my slide with that, the skull, etc., I talk about a ransomware protection plan and a reference to ransomware as a service. These terms that I have on the slide, for example, this is ransomware as a service. It's not going anywhere. If we don't take proactive measures, we are going to be just in a tailspin kind of a situation where it's just going to get more and more severe and out of control.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Pamela. Looking at some of the cases, right, it keeps on coming up again and again, is that the prevention costs, and it's callous to look at this from a cost standpoint. But on the other hand, it's very hard to quantify cyber risk. It's something that new methodologies are being developed about, like, how much does an attack cost, but really the holistic cost is really hard to track down. But if you do look at the investment ahead of time, even just in planning for business continuity, how to operate when your systems are created and you can't trust a vendor, the cases from an insurance standpoint get significantly cheaper. And so and that's why it's critical too that as an incident is discovered, we found that the top thing in keeping, an insurance claim low, which you could translate to, impact in a city's ability to operate and serve its citizens, is how they respond, and making sure that they immediately have an instant response firm on retainer, either that they've hired personally or that's paid for by their insurance, that they know who to call, they've talked to these people before, because every ransomware strain is different too, as I think you mentioned, Pamela, right? Like, some of these, as we saw with the North Koreans, have a very, very limited ability to actually make a payment or actually run the decryptor. So, even some of these strains that you might end up in a situation where you may be leveraging a full backup, even if you tried to pay. Whereas other ransomware, which is talked about, ransomware as a service, has become very sophisticated. And, I know some clients decide that the easiest way to go is just to make a payment. But you can't know ahead of time which one you're going to face, which is why it's really important to plan for what you'd have to do and the decisions that you as a city will make in whether or not you would pay or
so
seek
perhaps
remediation.
it's a good Perhaps that's a good segue into Stephen to tell us a little bit more about the role of crypto in ransomware. How has it become a predominant medium, and what can be done about it in order to address some of these issues that Pam and Davis have been raising?
Right. First of all, I want to touch on something you guys have already discussed, which is kind of briefly mentioning the role of education in this whole ransomware solution. And education, as I think all of us have experienced, is kind of the solution that no one wants to hear, right? When you come into the room and you talk about how do I solve this problem, if you mention education, eyes kind of roll because it's not like the right now solution. But we do want to stress, especially as it pertains to cryptocurrency, that in the long term, it really is the only way we're going to overcome this in a meaningful manner. So with cryptocurrency, I think the role is very intuitive. And if you talk to someone on the street, I think the mindset is still that cryptocurrency is untraceable and completely anonymous. At this point, however, it simply isn't true. And this graph that we have right up here is kind of illustrative of that. Now, this is a graph of the recent Twitter hack, and we're able to track very effectively despite a very complex network of transactions. At this point, not only can we track the transactions, we can also track them to identified entities. And we can immediately identify all of those circles there, which are points of liquidation, points at which they're hitting wallets associated with known cryptocurrency exchanges. So all of those points represent an instance at which we can identify through KYC information who owns this wallet and who is operating this account. And as we tighten up regulations on the cryptocurrency side, that will in turn make it much easier for us to track down ransomware creators.
Fantastic. If we still have a few more minutes, if anyone in the audience has any comments or questions, please type them in the chat. Meanwhile, Pamela and or Davis, if you guys want to respond to what Stephen's getting at, do you think we have a chance of getting ahead of this and actually being able to disincentivize hackers who go after systems with ransomware?
I'll just say one. Oh, go ahead, Davis.
Yeah, you know, no, please, Pamela, go ahead.
What I was mentioning with the Adecco prism, right? The fact is, we are going to be playing whack-a-mole, right, with ransomware. It's not something that'll just go away. How do we proactively produce a resilience to that? Is that we have a mentality of identifying what is critical, what can be isolated from anything else that might get impacted, right? That was the example with the Adecco president. But more broadly, we have the measures. We know what to do. We just have to apply it. This cannot be reactive. It is too much out of control to be reactive. We have to be proactive. We have the measures to do this. I mentioned I had created a ransomware protection plan. Please read it. It is actionable. It is readable. CISA just released guidance on ransomware, and that includes even things like what to do as an incident response kind of a thing, right? So once you have been hit, because you are going to be hit, but point is, you can prevent it, you can contain it. That is where we have to think going forward, because we can't just keep eliminating ransomware, sorry. It's going to keep popping up. It'll be playing whack-a-mole. It's reactive. We have to be strategic. We have to be proactive.
All right, Davis?
Yeah, and so I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on Stephen's side on the payment and discuss that. You know, I do think that there is a huge opportunity with the growth of capabilities on doing crypto analysis to really look at how do you start to solve the economics of this problem. You know, unfortunately, one of the issues, and I know personally from working at Homeland Security and for CISA, which does wonderful work, how hard it is to get cyber policy right. But one of the issues that, you know, recently I don't believe is quite as helpful is the recent guidance from Treasury on OFAC, noting that if you make a ransomware payment inadvertently to, you know, somebody who's on the foreign sanctions list, you as a company will be held liable. And while I understand from talking to policy professionals that this is designed to encourage cooperation with law enforcement, because there's language indicating that maybe if you talk with the FBI during the ransom, maybe Treasury won't come after you, but there's no guaranteed safe harbor. And I can say from talking to a lot of other people in industry that this will probably have a chilling effect on companies wanting to work with law enforcement in the event that they do have to pay a ransom, and in the event that it does end up turning out that ransom has gone back to a sanctioned company. So I think that rather than solutions that look to potentially penalize victims, I think looking at the crypto side or looking at efforts like we're taking against the TrickBot botnet to collaborate in a public-private way and actually go after the economics of this problem are a much better long-term solution. Rather than trying to institute a new policy that looks to double victimize the criminals, or double victimize the cities or victims.
Great. I believe we're at the time for the end of the panel. Real quick, I'll just go around, and if folks have just a final few words they'd like to make, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So I'll start with Pamela.
Well, I will just say that I do agree that the economics, if they are, this is a business, right? If it doesn't pay, we will be able to strike it at the root of the problem. But there may be other ways that come out to make that payment. So I think we really do need to see ransomware is one aspect of falling a victim to an attack. How do we create resilience as an organization, regardless of which sector, if it's private, public, or elsewhere? How do we create resilience that can be achieved? It has to be achieved because we don't have an alternative. We are in a state of digital transformation, which, according to McKinsey, we're 5 years ahead of where we would have been if pandemic hadn't come around. So resilience is achievable. Let's do it proactively and strategically.
Great. Stephen, a few final words?
Yeah, ultimately our goal is to get everyone on the same page of the ransomware situation. We want to get the corporations and the victims on the same page. We want to get law enforcement on the same page. We want to get the crypto exchanges on the same page. And that's something that we have to work very diligently on. A lot of the time, we do encounter friction when we talk to law enforcement about cryptocurrency enforcement. It's simply not something they're comfortable with. They don't even believe that the cryptocurrency is trackable. And so sort of broad education for us is a key portion of the ransomware solution. Just making sure that everyone knows that, hey, there are alternatives. We are working towards a long-term actionable solution.
All right. Davis, final words, please.
Yeah, 3 things to keep in mind if you are an operator facing ransomware. 1, don't do it alone. Make sure you have an instant response firm that's experienced with ransomware remediation and negotiations. 2, common hygiene. I mean, that's the hardest problem and most expensive to invest in. But, especially looking at RDP or SMB as the common vectors now, we're really seeing, in fact, even insurance companies are looking at whether or not RDP is accessible or secured. So that's a big one to watch for. And then 3rd is secure backups. So we've also seen tons of cases where insureds have backups, but they weren't off-site or they were connected into the majority of the IT system and they were infected right along with everything else. So really focusing on backup set up securely, RDP, and having an IR team on retainer. Those 3 things we found are the best preventions economically.
All right, thank you all 3 for being here this morning and sharing your thoughts with the audience. Thank you to Len Jensen and the entire organization for having us for this session. And we wish everybody well.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much, David.